Well, let's talk about it. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to do a review for Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. So, this is a book I read quite a while ago. I finished this, I think, in August. So, this is a bit of a delayed review. And if you have been keeping up with my channel, more or less, and if you have been talking with me on Discord, you know that I was very mixed on this book. So, just for a quick backstory, I started reading Sanderson in 2020 with Elantris, and I was going through the Cosmere in publication order. So I read Elantris before this, and then I read the Mistborn Era 1 trilogy before this. And I actually enjoyed Elantris quite a bit. I didn't think it was great per se, but I do think it had a lot of like good things going for it. It did very much feel like Sanderson was still finding his stride as a writer, but I still enjoyed it and I liked a lot of the ideas that he was presenting in that book. Then I went into the Mistborn trilogy and I loved all three of those books. All three were 5 stars. I loved all of them, and I think each of those books was better than the last. So for me, like Sanderson was just trending upwards, and I knew, okay, I have Warbreaker, and then I have Stormlight, and Stormlight people just loved so much that it's probably going to go upwards. So I had a lot of hype going into Warbreaker because I had enjoyed all 4 books by the author before that. So yeah, going into Warbreaker, I was super hyped. I thought, okay, maybe it won't be as good as the Mistborn trilogy, but I was expecting at least something that I would really enjoy. Unfortunately, so it did start off well. I did enjoy the first like 50 to 100 pages of this book. Unfortunately, after that, the first half didn't vibe with me at all. So, and then at some point, I just had to put the book down, and I picked it up a few months later down the line and finished it in a few days. It was a bit of a weird experience, especially coming right out of the Mistborn trilogy. Going into this, I was like kind of, yeah, disappointed that that's how I was feeling about the book. So I did put it down for a few months, and then I got back to it a few months later down the line, and then read I basically put it down at the halfway point, and then the second half I read in a few days, and like I actually enjoyed way more. So yeah, for me, this was really a book of two very different halves. The first half was one where it had some interesting aspects, but just wasn't working that well for me. The second half, while I didn't still love it, I do think it was executed really well, and I think I did end up enjoying the book overall. But I do have to say, the first half really, I do think there are quite a few issues. At least I had a few issues with this book. That's kind of the gist of the story. And I will be talking about all the aspects I felt good about, felt mixed about. So yeah, but I will do so in a spoilery manner. So if you have not read this book, you should probably leave. I'm doing it as spoilers because I don't want to like over explain everything about the book. So yeah, get a more if you want to get a more spoiler-free version of my thoughts, check out my Goodreads review. I will link it in the description down below. So there you will be able to find my spoiler-free thoughts on what exactly worked and what exactly didn't work for me. But here I want to go more into it in a spoilery way. All right, let's get into it. So, as I mentioned, I was very hyped going into this book. And when I started reading it, the prologue and the first few chapters, I was like, okay, this is interesting. Like, prologue was interesting. I loved the introduction to Nightblood. And then the first chapter was a bit iffy for me because we follow Dedalin, who is obviously Ciri and Vivenna's father. And he makes this decision to not send Vivenna to marry the God King, but to send Ciri because he likes Vivenna better than Ciri and would rather send the daughter that hasn't been trained her whole life for that particular role. So, okay, that was something. So it's an intriguing setup, but I didn't like the whole motivation behind it because it felt like, okay, Dedalin was just like playing favorites with his kids, and it didn't end up leading anywhere. Like I was like, okay, this happened. Maybe it will play a role down the line, but in the end, it didn't matter at all. And that's kind of where my issues start. So first of all, my biggest selling point for this book was the fact that this is the story of two sisters. I was like, okay, that's a super intriguing idea, telling a fantasy stories about two sisters. Unfortunately, I don't think that the relationship between the two sisters or the fact that they were sisters really was used effectively at all. Like, they don't really have a very close relationship. The only reasons they think about each other is like in terms of the plot of the book. It's like, okay, what would Siri do in this? What would Vivenna do here? What would Siri do here? And yeah, basically Vivenna only thinks of Siri when she is misbehaving, basically, and she's like, oh, I'm acting like Siri, and Siri is only thinking of Vivenna in terms of being like, oh, how would Vivenna do this in this particular situation? Because obviously she has been put into the situation that Vivenna was meant for. So really, for me, it was a weird thing because I was really hyped to see like, okay, how will this relationship between the sisters play into the book? But it didn't really at all. So that's kind of something where I was immediately like, ah, that's kind of one of the points that I really was looking forward to in this kind of book. And yeah, Sanderson just chose not to focus on that, which is an okay choice to make, but I just think it's odd to kind of be selling a book as this like story of two sisters and just not using the fact that they're sisters. And like even on a more wider aspect of that, I don't think like that the relationships of the two sisters with their family in general are fleshed out at all. So basically we get to see their father in one chapter. Neither of them in the rest of the book actually has any like interesting thoughts or interactions with their father. Like the father is just out of the book after that. And then they do have two more siblings. So they have one sister who's Fafan, who we see in one chapter, I think, with Vivenna, but she also plays no role, and both sisters never actually think about her after that. And then we have, I don't even know his name, they have a brother who's the heir to their kingdom, and he also, like, he's never mentioned. I think he's mentioned maybe once, and then after that, I don't even know what he's doing. He's never on page, I think. So yeah, and also again, Siri and Vivenna don't ever think about him. And I don't know if they have any other family. Like I don't know what happened with their mother. I don't think their mother is mentioned at all in the book. So it was a bit of a weird situation where it felt like, okay, we have these two sisters, and I felt like, okay, the fact that they're sisters, like two of our main POVs are sisters, should kind of play a role in the book, but it didn't feel like any of their past life before the book starts mattered, or any of their past relationships really mattered. And that was kind of also, so Dedalin decides to not send Vivenna because he's like, oh no, I love Vivenna, I can't send her to the God King. And I was like, okay, so that's an interesting setup to kind of have like this father or daughter relationship. But then Vivenna just leaves their kingdom for months and is still living in Tetelier. Yeah, so, and her father doesn't care. Like her father doesn't send anybody out. It's not like his beloved daughter is gone, and like it doesn't matter. So that's immediately something where I'm like, okay, that's questionable for me. Like, okay, whatever. And then obviously we have the two other POVs. We have Vasher and we have Lightsong. Vasher I did enjoy. Vasher I mostly enjoyed though because of Nightblood in his chapters. I thought Nightblood and the way he was used in the book was very fun, and I do like the idea of having the sentient sword that's like super into killing stuff. So that was fun. Um, Regarding Light Song I was mixed on. I do think he was fun and he got me to chuckle a bit, but I never got super into the humor in his chapters. I do think the way his story played out in the end was quite well done, but again, for the first half of the book, I never felt like I was super invested into Lightsong or the cast around him. So yeah, for me, so you can already see we have like four main POVs in the book, and none of them was really working that well for me. So that's already a bit of an issue. So yeah, and then the next thing I want to talk about is the magic. So I think the magic system in this is actually super interesting, like awakening or biochromatic breath. I think it's a really interesting concept, and I think Sanderson also uses it well. Unfortunately, compared to especially Mistborn, it's not really a focus of the book. So the I do think the magic is interesting, and we do get to see some magic users, but it's not like we have in similar to Mistborn somebody who's learning the magic or somebody who is an expert at the magic. So we don't really get more revelations about the magic. We do get some idea about, okay, there are these different heightenings and they enable people to have different abilities, but we never really go into depth with it. Like, I know there is this like table at the end of the book in the Ars Arcanum that tells you, okay, you reach the first heightening, you get this power, you reach the second heightening, you get this power, etc. But it never feels like that actually ever comes up in the book. So again, it's like I feel like the magic is super intriguing and I think it could be used super well. I just don't feel like the book ever used it beyond just a superficial manner. Um, and then the next thing, and that's probably one thing that I feel I was the most disappointed in, is the world building in this book. So, okay, so this is a world, or not a world. The only thing we see of this world is two kingdoms. We see the kingdom of Idris. I think that's the kingdom where Syrian Venna come from. I think that's what it's called. And then we have the kingdom of Halandren, and we mostly spend time in Tetelir, right, the capital city of Halandren. And I do think there's a lot of potential in having this like two kingdom warfare kind of thing where you could really go into the tensions between the two. But we only spend time in Halandren and we never really see the side of Idris. And I know that Syria and Viven are supposed to be the two that are supposed to represent Idris, but it never feels like so. Syria and Vivenna aren't really two like high people in the political landscape of Idris. Like, yes, they're the daughters of the king, but the king, it's not like they're involved in the ruling or anything. So it doesn't feel like we actually get to see what the plans of the king and the kingdom of Idris are. We only get to see like, okay, what his daughters are kind of trying to do to help the kingdom and what Halandren is trying to do. So I do think that that particular aspect, again, it's an interesting concept and an interesting thing to explore. I just don't think it was used particularly well. I do think the different religions were interesting, and especially the way these different two kingdoms interact with the magic in the world. That was quite interesting. That one is like more drained and doesn't like to have colors, and one is like super colorful and is leaning into this magic system. Um, and I do think that was done well. But again, I don't think apart from that, it doesn't seem like they have too many differences, and we don't really get a lot of history either. So we have this like one historical event, which is the Many War, that's mentioned again and again, but we don't really get anything else. So we don't get a lot of other things that happened in this world. So it's kind of hard to imagine, like, especially outside of these two cities. So we get the main capital of Idris, and then we get the main capital of Alandran. But outside of that, we don't really know a lot about the world. So I don't know. In the end, like, yeah, there is this third kingdom, but it's like not that we know that it's set up or anything. So yeah, it's a bit of a weird thing where I feel like world building is something Sanderson actually does really well. But here again, it felt like it was not as developed as it could have been. And then related to that, I also think so. Halandran or Tetelir in particular is supposed to be this like exotic city, right? The way it's described is also a bit odd. So we do have this like super colorful place. Um, but so I was talking with somebody on Discord and like they mentioned that it's supposed to be like this exotic, I think like South American inspired city. I will put like an artwork here in case you don't know. And I didn't get that feeling at all from the book that it was that kind of a city. I was more getting a like Roman type feel from it. So I'm not sure if that's just me misreading or misinterpreting stuff or if it's like just not that well done. But it was something I was like, wait, it's supposed to be tropical. I'm like, okay, maybe interesting. But yeah, that's kind of something where I was like, okay, I did not get that from the book at all. And then there's the whole thing about the plot. And so you can see like all those aspects: characters, magic system, world building. Those are three aspects that, while I don't think like especially characters were super great in the other Sanderson books, I did enjoy his characters in the other Sanderson books. And magic and world building were great in his books. And I thought all three of those aspects were just fine in this book. Like they weren't bad, but I wouldn't be like, okay, they're super great, or they're, again, the concepts and the ideas behind them were super good, like the sister relationship, having this two different warring kingdoms, and then the magic system of biochromatic breath and awakening was super interesting as a concept, but I don't think that the way Sanderson utilized them in the book was really giving me much enjoyment. Like I wasn't super happy with how it was being used. So at that point, it's like, okay, I'm halfway through this book and I'm not really enjoying a lot of these aspects. But then also one thing that where I was confused, so I didn't ever get a real feel about what exactly the book was about, like the plot, what exactly was going on. Like we have this like exploration of Ciri's story where she's yeah, becoming the queen of Elandrin, and then there's this thing with the God King going on that, yeah, there's this mystery basically, and yeah, people were telling me like it's supposed to be a mystery book, but I don't think it's laid out or paced like a mystery book. Like it never felt like we were getting, oh, we were getting more clues throughout the book and trying to piece together this mystery. It felt kind of just like the book was just going without much aim. So I don't know. Again, this might just be a personal experience for me that I just didn't get hooked into the mystery particularly. But yeah, for me also, like with all the other aspects that weren't going great, also the plot and the pacing wasn't really something that was working. So yeah, overall the first half of the book was kind of hard for me to get through, and that's why, as I said, I put it down for a few months, and then when I picked it back up, I didn't even tell people I was reading it. I was just like, okay, I'll just go through it, and then thankfully the second half was much better. The second half, basically, once I started once I picked it up again, there basically the moment when Denth and Tongfa turned on Vivenna. That's kind of the turning point, because that's where the plot started moving really, where we were like, oh, okay, these people, we kind of start seeing who they are, and then we start seeing everything that's happening with Vasher, then the whole Sanderlanche in the end. That's kind of where I was like, okay, now it's getting interesting, and Sanderson is really good at doing these final acts, right? So I wasn't surprised that the final act was good, but I really enjoyed the final act. Unfortunately, I do still think the fact that I wasn't super invested in the first half did hamper my enjoyment of the second half. So I would like, overall, I would say the first half of the book was like a 4.5 out of 10. So yeah, I do, as I said, I do think in theory and in concept the ideas were there. I just didn't like the execution. And then the second half I would say was like an 8 out of 10. But if I was more invested in the first half, I think it could have had the potential to be more like a 9 out of 10. But yeah, so just because I wasn't super invested, I think the impact of the Sanderlanche and the total second half and all the plot twists wasn't as high as it could have been. The revelations that we get about Denth and Tongfa being like this, being these old, I don't know if they're particularly gods, but like that they have this backstory with Vasher, and Vasher actually being Warbreaker. I think that was super interesting and a super interesting reveal. But again, with the Warbreaker reveal, I'm like, okay, so we get this reveal in the end that Vasher is kind of like, what was it called, Khaled's Phantoms, or yeah, that he's that guy. Um, and I'm like, I do like that as an idea, but then I was also thinking, we have been in this guy's POV for a good chunk of this book, and we don't know about it. Like there were hints, and this is something I think I can't really judge until rereading the book, because it's like I don't know if maybe in hindsight the way that his POV is written is actually in line with getting this reveal. But for me, I do wonder if like his POV was a bit, yeah, I don't know, unreliable narratory to kind of make that reveal possible. Overall, second half I think was super interesting. I think the way Sanderson unfolds the whole plot and everything unravels and all the plot twists that come up, and yeah, Lightsong's sacrifice in the end. Blush Reaver's death was quite shocking to me actually as well. So all of that stuff I think was good, but I think it could have had even more impact if I enjoyed the first part. So that's kind of, you can see I'm very mixed on it. Like I have a lot of things that I do think could be really good, but I think they all have like this kind of this question mark for me, where I'm like, would I have enjoyed this more maybe if I'd read this at a different time? Or was it more of a timing thing for me that I didn't love this book? Or is it actually that I just don't connect with the things Sanderson was doing? I think it's kind of both. I do think that maybe I picked it up at not the best time for me, but I also don't think that with a lot of these things, also after thinking about them still a few months after I read the book, I still think that there are issues with this book. Um, so yeah, that's kind of my feelings on Warbreaker. I know it was a bit rambly, I guess, like not super structured, but yeah, I mean, I'm kind of sad that I didn't love this book because I was feeling like, okay, with Sanderson, I was like vibing with him a lot, especially in Mistborn. I was like, Mistborn is amazing, so I was super hyped to go through Warbreaker. Yeah, unfortunately, it did not work for me, but I did take some break from the Cosmere after finishing this. I wanted to say I was taking a break from Brandon Sanderson, but I was actually reading Skyward for the last few months, so I didn't actually take a break from Sanderson, but from the Cosmere I did take a break. And yeah, so with Warbreaker, I do think it's probably something I might revisit once the sequel comes out. Like I do want to get some distance from it, and maybe like a few years down the line, whenever Nightblood is supposed to come out, I'll try it again, and maybe I'll have a different experience. But at this point, as it stands, I would say Warbreaker first half mediocre, second half good. Overall, I would still say it's a solid book. I wouldn't still recommend people who are going through Sanderson to read it. I would not recommend people who are starting with Sanderson to start there particularly. I know a lot of people say that that's the book they would recommend starting with, but I feel like compared to his other books that I've read, this doesn't really represent what Sanderson tries to do. And it's also, I think, from what he says, it's like him trying to write a bit more out of sight of his comfort zone, right? Like he's trying to do more comedy and more romance in this book, which I commend him for that. Like I respect the fact that he's trying to like, or he, this is 10 years old at this point, or 15 years old at this point. So it's like he went into this book knowing, okay, I'm trying to develop my craft as a writer in things that I'm not super good at. So I think I do respect him for that. But unfortunately, neither the romance nor the comedy worked really for me. So yeah, at the end of the day, I have to say it's an okay book. I ended up giving it like, so I said 4.5 for the first half, 8 for the second half. So overall, that averages out to a 6.3, which I think is fine. It's a 3-star, which I know the way I'm talking about it, it doesn't feel like a 3-star book, but overall, I do think there are a lot of good things about the book. It's just I was disappointed because of my past experience with the author. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. But yeah, so what I was saying is basically now that I've taken this break, I'm starting to get the itch again to go back into the Cosmere. And if you watched my last video, which should be my reading plans video, you will know that I want to read Way of Kings soon, and I'm really hyped for Way of Kings, and I do think I will like that one more. So yeah, although I wasn't the biggest fan of Warbreaker, it's not like I'm going to give up on Sanderson or anything like that. So yeah, that's kind of the positive note that I guess we can end on is like, yes, unfortunately this didn't work for me, but we will be going through the Cosmere still. So that's kind of the silver lining that we can get from this. Like, while Warbreaker didn't work for me particularly well, I will still be reading through the Cosmere, and I'm pretty sure that Way of Kings, Stormlight in general, and hopefully also Mistborn Era 2 will work way better for me. So that's kind of my review for Warbreaker. I don't know if things made sense. I would like to hear what you guys think. I know a lot of people love the book. I also know a lot of people don't love the book. So it's interesting. I'm looking forward to like discuss more with you. I've been saying on Discord for a few months that I have I'm kind of, yeah, I have a hard time realizing what exactly people love about the book, because I feel like while all the aspects that I think could be good are kind of not handled that well. But yeah, that's kind of just my opinion. I guess it's an unpopular opinion, actually. Like Warbreaker, I've seen it being one of people's favorite Cosmere books. So yeah, unfortunately, that's not where it will land for me. Overall, it actually lands lower than Elantris for me, because I think with Elantris, I did give him the benefit of the doubt of it being his debut book. But for me, this feels like he fell back down after writing an amazing series in Mistborn. So yeah, those are my rambly thoughts about Warbreaker. Let me know how you feel about it. Let me know why I'm wrong for feeling like that about this book. And let me know how you think I will feel about The Way of Kings. I'm super hyped for Way of Kings, so I hope I will love it. But yeah, I think that's it. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.